Hi, I'm Kevin, and this is HFX by Bike, a channel all about getting around Halifax by bike. Except sometimes I try to fix curbside parking so that I can just have nicer streets. I made a video last year about the popular belief that there's nowhere to park in Halifax, and took a midday tour around downtown Halifax to see for myself. I managed to find thousands of spaces all over the place, and that got me thinking, if it's not the total number of spaces, maybe there's a particular type of parking that people want that they can't find. There are three places to park a car: your property, someone else's, or on public property. People don't generally complain about the lack of parking on their own property because they can broadly control where they live and how much parking they need to begin with. Parking on someone else's property downtown mostly takes the form of parkades, where drivers can pay to store their cars for however long they want in a central location. These don't really have capacity issues, since owners can just increase the parking rates until there's always a space available. And ultimately, if it's profitable enough, people will just build more parkades. That leaves public property, which mostly takes the form of on-street parking. When I made my video last year, the headline result of my parking tour downtown was that there was plenty of spots in general, but street spaces were more hit and miss during peak hours. It's totally plausible that you could look for street parking on a specific block and not find it. There are two reasons why we pay for street parking. The first being to raise revenue for the city. This is the least important reason, but it's the one that everyone focuses on. We could donate all the money to charity or set it on fire, and it would be just as important to right-price spaces. The real reason that we pay for street parking is to exclude other people from using the space that we want to use when we want to use it. The more people that want to park in a place at a specific time, the higher the price needs to be to guarantee that that space is available. When you can't find a space, it's because the price was too low for that level of demand. Whereas privately operated parkades have an incentive to set prices that reflect on the level of demand, street parking is managed by the city and does not share that incentive. The core issue is that street parking prices, while not completely arbitrary, are heavily influenced by public opinion rather than the level of demand. For a good example of this, you only have to look back about a year. Faced with a small budget deficit and not wanting to raise property taxes, the Halifax Regional Council floated the idea of charging for parking on evenings and weekends, something that's already the case for private parkades. Residents and business owners pushed back, citing the public perception that there's nowhere to park downtown, and street parking remained free and dysfunctional. You can see this more clearly by plotting out the costs of parking over the course of a week. Here are the cumulative costs of parking in two downtown parkades without monthly passes, but taking into account the daily maximums. Here's the minimum and maximum costs of metered parking across the city. Parking in public spaces for most of the city is discounted by almost 20 to 30% despite being the more convenient option. Only one meter zone in the city has similar costs to private parkades downtown, and it's actually not downtown, it's the area surrounding the hospitals. Speaking of the hospitals, they seem to be caught in the same trap as the city. Here's the parking at Victoria General Lot just off of downtown. It's almost half the price of either street parking or private parking in the surrounding area, and as a result, here's what the lot looks like in the middle of the day. This same pattern shows up for longer-term permit parking. Here are the costs of monthly passes at the same two private parkades downtown. And here are the costs for commuter and residential permits in the same neighborhoods. Whenever the price of parking is publicly managed, the price gets set too low to effectively manage scarce spaces. The situation isn't unique to Halifax. In 2008, the city of Chicago was broke. In a bid to stave off tax increases, the city sold off the rights to its parking meter revenue for 75 years to a group of private investors for $1.16 billion. The investors promptly raised the rates for parking to the market clearing price, and just 15 years later have already recouped the initial investment, plus $500 million on top of it, with a full 60 years left on the contract. So city governments are trapped. Underpriced street parking creates the perception that there's nowhere to park, and any attempt to increase parking rates are blocked on the grounds that there's the perception that there's nowhere to park. Is there a way to fix this? In the case of Chicago, parking rates were allowed to increase to meet the level of demand, but only after the city government had sold off the rights to the revenue to private interests. One approach that would allow for better management of street parking while keeping the revenue generated local would be to implement what are known as parking benefits districts. The basic concept is that neighborhoods would be able to form benefits districts. Within the district, the neighborhood would be responsible for managing on-street parking. To compensate for this responsibility, they would receive a share of the parking revenue within the district, let's say 50-50 split with the city as an example. The revenue from on-street parking within the district could then be used to fund projects within the same neighborhood, based on the priorities of the people living there. Projects would need to be planned out in advance with the city, but could hypothetically include things like better sidewalk and street maintenance, better snow clearing on sidewalks, art installations, graffiti removal, better bus shelters, neighborhood Wi-Fi, or even more ambitious projects like burying power lines. You're probably already thinking of the kinds of things you'd like to see in your neighborhood, and that's kind of the point. The ability to use revenue generated from parking in the district on neighborhood amenities gives an incentive to have parking rates that reflect the actual level of demand in the area. If a district undercharges for parking, they're essentially defunding their own projects in order to give free or discounted parking to strangers. If they overcharge, then people will stop parking there, and again, they've just defunded their own projects. Here's an example. Let's take a part of the city with really high demand for street parking. This is the Schmidtville Heritage District, and people would like to park here so they can go shop on Spring Garden Road. Commuters would like to park here so they can go to the hospital a few blocks away, and residents would like to park here because some of the properties actually don't have their own parking spaces. In a hypothetical Schmidtville Parking Benefits District, let's say there are 100 curbside spaces in total. The district could decide how many spaces to allocate between metered and permit spaces. The price of any metered spaces can be set at whatever price they think is appropriate. Their incentive, of course, is to pick a price that's high enough that people can reliably find parking, but not so high that they lose out on revenue. The price of any permit spaces can be set using what's called a single price auction. Say, for instance, 20 of the spots are designated for permits. The 20 permits would go up for auction every month or year, and people can enter a bid for how much they're willing to pay for that spot. Let's say 50 people enter a bid. The spots would go to the people who place the 20 highest bids, but each of them would only pay the price of the 20th highest bid. At that point, each of the main street parking types is priced based on demand in the same way that a parkade is. The more people that want to park there, the higher the rate goes. Drivers would get more reliable parking, neighborhoods would get better streets, and the city government would probably net get more revenue than it currently does, even after splitting it with neighborhoods. When the city wants to remove parking spaces by installing things like bus or bike lanes, it can just compensate the benefits district based on whatever terms are laid out when it was first established. For example, giving 5, 10, or however many years of expected revenue to the district in exchange for losing those spaces. This stops fights over public infrastructure from being turned into drawn-out culture war battles over a handful of parking spaces with nebulous, uncertain value. The value of the lost spaces is reflected in the total revenue that they generate, and that's it. To be clear, there's nothing stopping city governments from implementing this kind of demand-based pricing themselves. The usefulness of Parking Benefits District is that it creates a group of stakeholders who benefit from parking being priced at the rate that actually reflects demand, and who are less likely to be sympathetic to pleas for free or discounted parking. I plugged it in the video that I made last year, but if you want to learn more about parking benefits districts, I highly recommend checking out Donald Shoup's The High Cost of Free Parking. And if you're interested in this topic more generally, you should check out the work of the Parking Reform Network, link in the description. That's it for this one. Let me know in the comments if you think something like a parking benefits district could work in your neighborhood and what kind of projects you'd like to see the funds used for. If you find this kind of thing interesting, be sure to drop a like on the episode and subscribe to the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.